My name is Alex, and I am 32 years old. The moment the world tilted on its axis and shattered into a million unrecognizable pieces was when I stood on a ridiculously ornate stage, a microphone in my hand, looking out at a sea of expectant faces at my brother's wedding. They were all smiling, bathed in the soft golden glow of fairy lights and opulence. An opulence I was about to reveal was a complete and utter fraud. My brother Leo, the golden child, was beaming, his arm wrapped possessively around his bride, Chloe. And as he caught my eye, he gave me a smug little wink, a gesture that said, "I won. I have it all." He had no idea how right he was. He had it all, but none of it was his. It was mine. Or more accurately, it was hers. It belonged to the memory of my late wife, Sarah, and the empire she and I had built together. The toast I was about to give wasn't going to be the saccharine tribute everyone expected. It was going to be a reckoning. A meticulous, cold, and final demolition of the life my brother thought he had built, revealing the rotten foundation it truly stood upon, a secret private partnership between his new bride and me. A partnership that had funded his entire existence, from his designer shoes to the very ring on Chloe's finger. The weight of the microphone felt like a granite slab in my hand, and the silence in the room was a heavy blanket, thick with anticipation. They wanted a story about brotherly love. They were about to get a story about betrayal, greed, and the day the Invisible Man finally decided to show the world his scars. This wasn't just a toast. It was the final chapter of a long and painful story, and the beginning of my reclamation. I cleared my throat, the sound echoing slightly in the vast, ostentatious hall, and I began to speak, my voice steady, calculated, and utterly devoid of the warmth they were all expecting. The story had to be told, not just for me, but for Sarah. Sarah was not just my wife. She was a supernova, a brilliant, fiercely intelligent woman who saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. We met at a dusty university library, both reaching for the same obscure textbook on economic theory. Her laugh when our hands brushed was like the opening notes of my favorite song. From that moment, we were inseparable. She had the vision, the raw, untamable intellect, and I had the practical, steady hand to ground her brilliant ideas in reality. Together, we were more than just a couple. We were a formidable team. We started our first business out of our tiny apartment, fueled by cheap coffee and an unshakable belief in each other. It was a financial tech company built on an algorithm Sarah designed in a flurry of inspiration over one long weekend. She saw patterns in market data that no one else could, and I built the infrastructure to make her vision a functional, profitable reality. We worked 18-hour days, our successes and failures weaving themselves into the fabric of our relationship. I remember the night we secured our first major investor. We didn't go out to a fancy restaurant, we sat on the floor of our office eating pizza out of a cardboard box, and we drew our future on a whiteboard. A future filled with innovation, travel, and a family. A future that felt as solid and real as the floor beneath us. That whiteboard, covered in her elegant looping handwriting, became a sacred text to me, a map of a world I was desperate to build with her. She was the heart of our operation, the light that guided everything. Her presence filled every room, her energy was infectious, and her belief in me was the bedrock of my own confidence. Losing her was not like losing a person. It was like the sun being extinguished from my sky, leaving me in a cold, permanent twilight. The diagnosis came without warning. A brutal, swift illness that stole her from me in a matter of months. Grief is a disorienting, suffocating fog. The vibrant world we had built together faded to grayscale. The company we had poured our souls into felt like a hollow monument to a future that would never arrive. For a year, I was a ghost haunting the halls of my own life. The business ran on the systems we had built, but the spark was gone. Her side of the bed remained cold, her coffee cup sat unwashed by the sink, and her laughter echoed only in the desolate chambers of my memory. It was during this period, this long, dark night of the soul, that I truly understood the value of what we had created. It wasn't just about the money or the success, it was her legacy. Every line of code, every contract, every dollar in our accounts was a testament to her brilliance. I felt a crushing, overwhelming responsibility to protect it, to honor her memory by ensuring that what she built would not only survive, but thrive. This legacy was the last tangible piece of her I had left, and I clung to it with the desperation of a drowning man. It was in this state of profound vulnerability, of trying to navigate a world without my compass, that the vultures began to circle, cloaked in the guise of family concern. My grief made me blind, and my desperation to preserve Sarah's memory made me an easy target for the emotional manipulation that was about to begin, orchestrated by the very people I should have been able to trust the most. My younger brother Leo has always been the star of our family's solar system, and I, a distant, reliable planet, was expected to maintain a steady, uncelebrated orbit around him. He was born with a charisma that could charm the birds from the trees and a profound aversion to anything resembling hard work or responsibility. While I was studying for exams, he was the life of the party. While I was building a business from the ground up, he was finding himself a journey that seemed to exclusively involve expensive hobbies, failed artistic endeavors, and a revolving door of entry-level jobs he'd quit out of boredom. My parents, however, saw his irresponsibility as creative spirit and his lack of direction as a charming quirk. "He's a free spirit, Alex," my mother would say, a gentle, chiding tone in her voice. "Not everyone is cut out for the 9-to-5 grind like you are." They were the architects of the Golden Child narrative, and they were its most devout followers. Every one of Leo's failures was reframed as a learning experience. Every one of his financial blunders, a temporary setback on his path to greatness. And who was always called upon to clean up the mess? Me. From his unpaid rent and maxed out credit cards in college, to the seed money for a string of harebrained business, Venturessa Gourmet Dog Biscuit Bakery, a line of ironic t-shirts, a disastrous attempt at being a music festival promoter, I was the family's unofficial emergency fund. My success was not a source of pride for them, but a resource to be tapped for the benefit of their favored son. They never saw it as me giving up my own resources. They saw it as the family's collective success being properly allocated to the one who needed it more. The unfairness of it all was a constant, low-grade hum in the background of my life, a family dynamic I had long since accepted as unchangeable. I loved my brother, but the version of him my parents saw was a work of fiction they tirelessly co-authored. My relationship with my parents became strained after Sarah's death. Their attempts at consolation were clumsy and often backfired, revealing their fundamental misunderstanding of who I was. They saw my grief not as a wound to be healed, but as a problem to be solved, an inconvenient disruption to the family's equilibrium. "You need to get out more, Alex," my father would say, his voice gruff with misplaced concern. "Sitting around in this big empty house isn't doing you any good." They couldn't comprehend that the house wasn't empty. It was filled with the ghost of the only person who had ever truly seen me. Their solution was, as always, to push Leo further into my life, as if his vapid cheerfulness could somehow patch the gaping hole in my soul. They would arrange for him to check in on me, visits that inevitably devolved into him talking about his latest get-rich-quick scheme or complaining about his financial woes. The conversations were always a thinly veiled prelude to a request for money. "It's just to tide him over, Alex," my mother would plead after one of these visits. "He has so much potential, he just needs a little stability. With everything you have, it's the least you can do for your brother." The implication was clear. My wealth, the fruit of my and Sarah's relentless labor, wasn't truly mine. It was a family asset, and I was merely its custodian. My grief became a lever they used to pry open my wallet. My emotional vulnerability was a weakness they exploited, cloaking their enablement of Leo in the language of familial duty and concern for my well-being. "Helping Leo will give you a sense of purpose again," they'd say, a line so absurdly manipulative it left me speechless. The constant pressure combined with my own emotional exhaustion wore me down. I began to give in, not because I believed it would help Leo, but because I simply lacked the strength to fight them anymore. It was easier to write a check than to endure another one of their guilt-laden lectures. It was a tax I paid for a semblance of peace, a temporary reprieve from their suffocating brand of care. It was in this fog of grief and family pressure that I met Chloe. She was introduced to me by a mutual business acquaintance who knew I was struggling to manage the vast portfolio Sarah and I had built. Chloe was sharp, ambitious, and radiated a quiet competence that reminded me just a little of Sarah. She had a background in finance and asset management, and during our first meeting, she spoke about Sarah's business legacy with a reverence that felt genuine. She understood what it represented. "What you and your wife built is extraordinary, Alex," she said, her eyes meeting mine with an intensity that seemed to cut through my haze. "It deserves to be managed with precision and respect." For the first time in over a year, I felt a flicker of hope. I saw a path to honoring Sarah's memory without having to immerse myself in the painful day-to-day details of a world we were supposed to navigate together. I needed help, and Chloe seemed like the perfect solution. I hired her to manage the legacy fund, the specific portion of our wealth that was earmarked for the future projects Sarah and I had dreamed of: charitable foundations, new ventures, a life of exploration. It was sacred money, and I entrusted it to Chloe with a solemn charge to protect it and make it grow. We formed what I, in my naivety, called a private partnership. She would be the sole manager, the gatekeeper. This arrangement also served a secondary, more cynical purpose. It created a buffer between me and my family's incessant financial demands. When the next call came from my mother about Leo's emergency, I had a new response. "You'll have to talk to Chloe," I'd say. "She manages that side of things now. It felt like a perfect solution. I could protect Sarah's legacy, appease my family, and shield myself from the emotional toll of their manipulations. I had, in effect, outsourced the problem of my brother to a highly capable professional. I believed I had found an ally, a guardian for Sarah's legacy. I had no idea. I had just handed the keys to the kingdom to a fox and pointed her directly at the henhouse. The initial arrangement worked exactly as I had intended. My parents would call me, I would direct them to Chloe, and she would handle it. She was impeccably professional, always documenting the transactions as family loans and providing me with sanitized reports. Just another loan for Leo's startup costs. She'd report, her tone, a perfect blend of professional detachment and subtle commiseration. It felt clean, detached. I didn't have to listen to my mother's justifications or Leo's empty promises. I could approve the transfer with a simple email and wash my hands of it. I was so consumed by my own world, my work, my grief, the slow and arduous process of rebuilding a life for one that I didn't pay close enough attention. I saw the line items on the reports, but I failed to see the bigger picture taking shape. The requests became more frequent, the amounts larger. It started with covering his rent on a trendy loft apartment. Then it was a new car, because his old one was unreliable for his new consulting gig. Then there were networking trips to Bali and Ibiza. Each transaction was a small drop, but the drops were creating a flood that was slowly eroding the foundations of Sarah's legacy. I was complicit in my own deception, choosing willful ignorance over confrontation because it was easier. I told myself it was just money and I had plenty of it. I justified it as a necessary sacrifice to keep the peace and to keep my parents off my back. But deep down, a seed of resentment was being planted, a cold knot of anger tightening in my chest. I was funding a life of leisure for my brother with the money my wife and I had bled for. It was a bitter pill to swallow, and to avoid choking on it, I simply stopped looking too closely. Chloe was my enabler. She made the entire process so seamless, so sterile that I could almost pretend it wasn't happening. Her reports were my shield, allowing me to maintain the illusion that I was in control, that these were merely loans that would one day be repaid, a fantasy as ridiculous as one of Leo's business plans. I should have become suspicious when Chloe started talking about Leo differently. In the beginning, she spoke of him with the same professional disdain I felt, referring to him in our conversations as your brother or the beneficiary. But slowly, a shift occurred. The professional detachment began to fray at the edges. Leo was telling me about his new project, she'd say, a strange hint of admiration in her voice. It actually sounds quite promising. I dismissed it as her simply trying to be polite, to maintain a good working relationship with the family she was now so entangled with. Then I started hearing about her from my parents. Chloe is such a wonderful girl, Alex. My mother chirped over the phone one Sunday. She's been so helpful to Leo, she really seems to get him. The phrase made my skin crawl. What was there to get? His charm? His bottomless sense of entitlement? I saw them together once by chance at a coffee shop downtown. They were huddled over a laptop, laughing. Leo had his hand on her arm, a casual gesture of intimacy that sent a jolt of unease through me. When Chloe saw me, she looked startled, her smile faltering for just a second before she recalibrated. Alex, what a surprise, she said, her voice a little too bright. Leo was just showing me the business plan for his new app. Leo, ever the charmer, just grinned. She's a lifesaver, bro. A real genius. The way he said it, the way she looked at him, it wasn't the look of a financial manager with her client's irresponsible brother. It was something else. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on, but it felt conspiratorial. It was a tiny crack in the facade, a moment of dissonance in the carefully constructed narrative. But I explained it away. Maybe she was just good at her job, I told myself. Maybe she was just a people person. I was too busy, too tired, too mired in my own memories to connect the dots. The truth was staring me right in the face, but I refused to see it. The engagement announcement was a bombshell dropped into the quiet crater of my life. My mother called me, her voice practically vibrating with excitement. Alex, you'll never believe it! Leo is getting married, and to the most wonderful girl, Chloe! The phone felt slick in my hand. I remember sitting down heavily on the edge of my unmade bed, the silence in my house suddenly roaring in my ears. It didn't make sense. Chloe? My Chloe? The professional I had hired, the guardian of Sarah's legacy, was marrying my feckless, perpetually broke brother? A cold, sickening dread washed over me, a feeling of profound and absolute betrayal. It was one thing to manage his finances. It was another thing entirely to merge her life with his. I mumbled some congratulations, my throat tight, and ended the call. My mind was racing, replaying every interaction, every report, every conversation with Chloe. The shared laughter in the coffee shop, my mother's fawning praise, Chloe's shifting tone it all snapped into a horrifyingly clear picture. This wasn't a whirlwind romance. This was a merger. A hostile takeover of my life, my family, and my money. The professional and the personal had collapsed into one another, and I was standing in the wreckage. The first thing I did was pull up the online announcement from a local society page. There was a picture of them beaming. Leo looked like he'd won the lottery, and Chloe looked triumphant. And on her finger was a diamond ring, a large cushion-cut diamond, flanked by two smaller sapphires. My blood ran cold. It was the exact design I had sketched out for Sarah years ago. A custom design we had saved in a shared file on my computer. A file Chloe would have had access to as part of her deep dive into our financial and personal documents. I had wanted to give Sarah a ring that was as unique as she was. Now, a pale imitation of it was sitting on the finger of the woman who was helping my brother drain her legacy. The confrontation was immediate and disastrous. I called Chloe and demanded a meeting, my voice colder than I had ever heard it. We met at a sterile, impersonal hotel bar, the kind of place where secrets go to die. She arrived looking radiant, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. Before she could even order a drink, I slid a printed photo of the ring across the table. "Explain this," I said, my voice low and shaking with rage. She glanced at the photo, her composure unwavering. "It's my engagement ring, Alex. Isn't it beautiful?" She said, a hint of defiance in her tone. "It's Sarah's design," I shot back. "It's the ring I was going to give to my wife." Her mask of innocent joy slipped, replaced by a cool, practiced dismissiveness. "Don't be ridiculous," she scoffed. "It's a classic design. You can't possibly think you're the only person to ever come up with it." Leo and I picked it out together. The lie was so blatant, so insulting, it took my breath away. She was gaslighting me, trying to make me feel like the crazy, jealous, grieving husband who couldn't stand to see anyone else happy. I pressed on, my voice rising. "And the money, Chloe? How does a man who can't hold down a job for more than 6 months afford a ring like that? A loft apartment? A European vacation?" Her eyes hardened. "The loans were all approved by you, Alex," she said, her voice turning to ice. "Every single one. I have the emails. You signed off on all of it. If you were concerned about the amounts, you should have said something sooner. This isn't my fault. I'm just the manager." She had turned my own system, my own willful ignorance, against me. She had used my grief and my desire for detachment as a weapon. "You were supposed to be a gatekeeper," I said, my voice cracking. "Not an accomplice." She leaned forward, her face a mask of false sympathy. "Leo is a good man, Alex. He just needed a chance. And you have so much. I thought, you'd be happy for him. For us." The "we" hung in the air between us. A confession. It was never just her, it was them. The betrayal was complete, and I had funded it every step of the way. I walked out of that bar not just heartbroken, but with a new, terrifying clarity. The fog of grief was finally lifting, replaced by the cold, hard light of rage. The fight was no longer about money, it was about justice. Justice for me, and justice for Sarah. The day after my disastrous meeting with Chloe, I made a call that would change everything. I found Mr. Davies through a recommendation from my corporate lawyer. He was a forensic accountant, a man described to me as a financial bloodhound. When I met him in his quiet, unassuming office, he was the polar opposite of the flamboyant Leo or the polished Chloe. He was a man of meticulous detail, with sharp eyes that seemed to see straight through to the bottom line. He listened to my story without interruption, his face impassive. I told him everything about Sarah, about our company, about the legacy fund, my brother's history, my parents' enablement, and my foolish arrangement with Chloe. I laid out the whole sordid mess, feeling a strange sense of relief in the confession. When I was done, he simply steepled his fingers and looked at me across his large mahogany desk. "Mr. Jensen," he said, his voice calm and precise, "grief makes us do foolish things, and love, or what passes for it in families, makes us do even more foolish things. Let's find out exactly how foolish." That was the moment my role shifted from victim to investigator. For the first time since Sarah's death, I felt a sense of agency, a surge of purpose that wasn't born of grief, but of a cold, clear-eyed determination. Mr. Davies became my ally, my guide through the labyrinth of financial records. I had been too afraid and too sad to navigate myself. He requested full access to every account, every report Chloe had ever filed, every email exchange. Handing over that control was a monumental step. It was an admission that I had failed as the guardian of Sarah's legacy, but it was also the first step toward reclaiming it. Mr. Davies wasn't just an accountant, he was a strategist. He was the external objective force I needed, a man with no emotional connection to the players, only to the numbers, and the numbers, he assured me, never lied. The investigation was a slow, methodical descent into a pit of deceit I had unknowingly dug for myself. Mr. Davies worked with a quiet, relentless efficiency. He and his team began to comb through years of financial data, cross-referencing Chloe's reports with the actual bank statements, credit card bills, and wire transfers. The first few discoveries were small but unsettling. Discrepancies in dates. Minor expenses recategorized to sound more legitimate. A business dinner for Leo that was actually a lavish birthday party. A software purchase that turned out to be a set of high-end golf clubs. These were the things Chloe had sanitized in her reports to me, counting on the fact that I wouldn't check the source documents. Each small lie Mr. Davies uncovered was like a stone being lifted, revealing the ugliness writhing underneath. He would call me into his office for weekly updates, his conference table covered in binders and spreadsheets. He would walk me through his findings with a dispassionate clarity that was both horrifying and validating. "Here," he would say, pointing to a line item. "Miss Vance reported this as a consultant fee of $5,000 to a tech expert for Leo's app. The transfer actually went to a personal account in her own name." The scale of the deception was breathtaking. It wasn't just about her enabling Leo's spending. She was actively skimming off the top, enriching herself under the guise of managing my family's loans. The partnership I had formed with her to protect myself from my family had become a partnership between her and my brother, with me, as the unwitting benefactor of their entire lifestyle. The feeling of foolishness was immense, a heavy cloak I couldn't seem to shake. How could I have been so blind? How could I have trusted her so completely? Mr. Davies was patient with my self-recrimination. "You weren't looking for a thief because you didn't want to find one," he said during one of our meetings. "They counted on your grief and your desire for a simple solution. It's a classic case of affinity fraud. They used your trust against you." The deeper Mr. Davies dug, the more sinister the picture became. The small deceptions gave way to a pattern of systematic, calculated embezzlement. Chloe hadn't just been skimming, she had been restructuring. With the access I had given her, she had been slowly moving funds into new accounts, creating complex financial structures that were designed to obfuscate the money's origin. She was a far more sophisticated criminal than I had imagined. She wasn't just stealing money, she was laundering it through the narrative of my brother's fabricated success. The loans I had approved were the clean money that allowed them to build a portfolio of assets, the apartment, the car, investments that would appear legitimate. It was a long-term plan to build a life for themselves, completely funded by my late wife's legacy. The most damning discovery came when Mr. Davies' team managed to recover deleted files from the cloud server I had given Chloe access to. Buried within a seemingly innocuous folder labeled Household Budgets was their master plan. It was a series of spreadsheets and documents, a roadmap to their future. It detailed their 5-year financial plan, culminating in them using their legitimate asset base to secure a business loan and launch a real company, effectively cutting me out entirely. There were even draft legal documents prepared by a lawyer I didn't recognize, exploring ways to have me declared emotionally unfit to manage my own finances. Citing my prolonged and debilitating grief, a move that would have given Chloe, as Leo's wife and a trusted financial manager, a path to gaining control over the entire estate. Reading those documents felt like a physical blow. They hadn't just betrayed me, they had weaponized my love for Sarah against me. They had planned to use my deepest pain as a tool to steal everything she had ever worked for. The grief I had been drowning in for years was instantly cauterized by a white-hot, purifying anger. There was no more sadness. There was no more confusion. There was only a singular, crystalline purpose to burn their world to the ground. With a folder full of irrefutable evidence, I decided to give my parents one last chance to see the truth. The wedding was a few weeks away, and a part of me, a small, foolish part, hoped that they would react with the horror and outrage that any sane parent would. I arranged to meet them for dinner at their house, the house I grew up in, a place once filled with warmth that now felt like a stage for a long-running farce. I sat them down in the living room, the same room where they had so often lectured me about my duty to Leo. I didn't raise my voice. I spoke calmly, methodically, laying out the evidence, just as Mr. Davies had laid it out for me. I showed them the bank statements, the forged expense reports, the path of the money from my account to Chloe's, to Leo's extravagant life. I showed them the ring, a picture of my original design next to a picture of it on Chloe's hand. I saved the final, most damning piece of evidence, the plot to have me declared incompetent, for last. I watched their faces as I spoke, searching for a flicker of understanding, of dawning horror. I found none. My father shifted uncomfortably in his armchair, his face hardening. My mother began to cry, but not for me. "I don't believe you," she said, her voice trembling with accusation. "Chloe is a lovely girl." "Leo is so happy for the first time in his life. Why are you trying to destroy that, Alex? Is it because you're miserable? You can't stand to see your brother happy when you're still moping around after all this time." The cruelty of her words was stunning. She wasn't just dismissing the facts, she was twisting my grief into a pathetic, jealous rage. My father chimed in, his voice booming with righteous indignation. Your mother is right. This is unbecoming. You have more money than you know what to do with. So what if you helped your brother? That's what family does. You should be proud of him, not trying to tear him down with these fabricated documents. Fabricated. They looked at a mountain of evidence and chose to believe the comforting lie. They saw their golden child, finally successful, finally happy, and they would do anything to protect that illusion, even if it meant sacrificing their other son. In that moment, sitting in their suffocatingly familiar living room, I finally understood they were not just enablers, they were antagonists. Their love for Leo was so blind, so all-consuming, that it had completely eclipsed their love for me. I had lost my parents long before Sarah died. I just hadn't been willing to admit it. I gathered my papers, my hands steady. The last flicker of hope for their redemption had been extinguished. Okay, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Okay, don't say I didn't warn you. Leaving my parents' house that night, I felt a profound sense of release. The burden of seeking their approval, of hoping for their understanding, was gone. They had made their choice. They had chosen the beautiful, comforting lie over the ugly, inconvenient truth. And in doing so, they had freed me. I was no longer bound by any misplaced sense of familial obligation. My path forward was clear, and it was a path I would walk alone, with only the memory of Sarah and the cold, hard facts as my companions. The weeks leading up to the wedding were a strange combination of meticulous planning and emotional detachment. While the bride and groom were tasting cakes and finalizing flower arrangements, I was in a war room with Mr. Davies and a team of lawyers he had recommended. We were preparing for a battle on two fronts, the legal and the public. The lawyers were preparing lawsuits, liens, and injunctions to freeze every asset Chloe and Leo had acquired with my money. We were building an airtight case that would not only reclaim every stolen dollar, but would also have serious professional consequences for Chloe and potential criminal ones for them both. Mr. Davies, ever the strategist, helped me prepare for the second front, the wedding itself. A public accusation is a powerful weapon, he advised, but it must be deployed with surgical precision. You cannot appear to be a raving, jealous brother. You must be the voice of reason, the bearer of unavoidable, documented truth. So, we prepared the narrative. We condensed the mountain of financial data into a simple, clear, and undeniable story. We prepared visual aids key bank statements, the side-by-side comparison of the ring designs, a flowchart showing the movement of funds that could be displayed for all to see. It felt surreal planning the public demolition of my brother's life with the same level of detail that he was planning his party. But every receipt for a floral arrangement or a catering deposit that I saw leaked to me by a sympathetic contact at the wedding venue who was concerned about the couple's suspicious payment methods only fueled my resolve. They were building their dream on a foundation of my pain, and I was about to trigger the earthquake that would bring it all crashing down. The day of the wedding arrived, a perfect sunny Saturday in June. The venue was a sprawling, obscenely expensive country estate, a place of rolling green lawns and historic grandeur. Every detail screamed wealth and success, a carefully curated illusion designed to impress. As I walked through the crowds of smiling guests, all of them oblivious, I felt a strange sense of calm. The anger was still there, a cold, hard stone in my gut, but it was overlaid with a grim sense of purpose. I was a surgeon about to perform a difficult but necessary operation. I saw my parents, beaming with pride, greeting guests as if they were the hosts, as if they had paid for this lavish spectacle. They saw me and their smiles tightened. My mother approached me, her voice a low hiss. Alex, I hope you're going to behave yourself today. Do not ruin this for your brother. I simply looked at her, my face a blank mask. I'm just here to wish the happy couple well, I said, my voice neutral. She searched my eyes for a sign of surrender, but found none, and retreated back to her fantasy. I saw Leo and Chloe making their rounds, the king and queen of their stolen castle. Leo was practically glowing, drunk on the attention and the trappings of a life he had never earned. Chloe was the picture of bridal perfection, her smile unwavering, her eyes sweeping the room with a proprietary air. When she saw me, her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, a flicker of anxiety in her eyes, before she masked it with practiced grace. She knew I had the power to undo her, but she was betting I wouldn't have the nerve. She was betting that my lifelong habit of quiet endurance would win out. It was the biggest gamble of her life, and she was about to lose everything. The ceremony was a blur of empty words and hollow promises. I watched them exchange vows they had no right to, their hypocrisy a tangible thing in the air. When the officiant declared them husband and wife, the crowd erupted in applause. I remained silent, my hands clasped behind my back. The real ceremony, the one that mattered, was yet to come. During the reception, I was seated at a table far from the head table, a deliberate act of petty exclusion by the happy couple, which suited me perfectly. It gave me a vantage point to observe the whole charade. I watched them dance their first dance, swaying to a love song that was as fake as their financial statements. I watched my father give a rambling, emotional speech about how proud he was of his son, the self-made man, a statement so galling it was almost comical. I watched the champagne flow, a river of my money poured down the throats of people celebrating a lie. Through it all, I felt nothing but a cold, waiting stillness. My turn was coming. The wedding planner, a harried woman with a clipboard, eventually approached me. "You're up next for the toast, Mr. Jensen," she said with a strained smile. I nodded, took a final, steadying sip of water, and made my way to the stage. As I walked, I could feel Chloe's eyes on me. I didn't look at her. I kept my gaze fixed on the microphone stand. I stepped onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinding me. The room quieted down, the chatter fading into an expectant hush. I looked out at the sea of faces, friends of my parents, colleagues of Chloe, hangers-on of Leo, and then I looked at the head table, my parents looking nervous. Leo giving me that same smug wink as before, and Chloe, her smile fixed, her eyes like chips of ice. She was daring me. I took the microphone from its stand. The weight of it felt familiar now, comfortable. This was the moment Mr. Davies and I had planned for, the moment all the anger, the grief, and the betrayal would be transmuted into action. I was no longer the grieving husband, the overlooked brother, the silent benefactor. I was the narrator of a story that everyone in this room needed to hear. The story of a perfect crime, a perfect betrayal, and a perfect reckoning. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice clear and steady, amplified throughout the grand hall. A polite murmur of acknowledgement rippled through the crowd. "For those of you who don't know me, my name is Alex Jensen. Leo is my brother." I paused, letting my eyes sweep across the room before they landed directly on the head table. Leo was grinning, nudging Chloe as if to say, "Here it comes, the boring brotherly tribute. I've been asked to make a toast to the happy couple." I continued, my tone pleasant, conversational. "And I want to start by saying how truly remarkable this all is. This beautiful venue, the exquisite flowers, the incredible food. It's all a testament to what can be achieved with vision, ambition, and a very specific kind of partnership." I saw a flicker of confusion in some of the guests' faces. This wasn't the standard best man speech opening. At the head table, Chloe's smile was beginning to look strained. "Leo has always been a dreamer," I said, turning my body slightly to face him. "He's had so many grand ideas over the years. A gourmet dog biscuit empire, a revolutionary t-shirt line, so many ventures. And my parents have always encouraged that spirit, always telling him to follow his dreams no matter the cost." My parents shifted uncomfortably. This was not the laudatory speech they were expecting. But dreams, as we all know, aren't free. A lifestyle like the one Leo has become accustomed to the loft apartment, the fancy car, the international business trips that requires significant capital. And for a long time, I couldn't figure it out. Where was the money coming from? His consulting business? His new app? I looked, but I could never find any actual revenue, any clients, any product. The room was now completely silent. The clinking of cutlery had stopped. All eyes were on me. Leo's grin had vanished, replaced by a look of bewildered apprehension. "So, I did some digging," I said, my voice dropping slightly, becoming more confessional. "I had to. I needed to understand this miracle of finance that my brother had apparently mastered. And what I found was the secret to his success. It wasn't an app or a consulting gig. The secret to Leo's entire life for the past 2 years has been a silent partner. A very generous, very private benefactor." I let that hang in the air for a moment. I could see the wheels turning in people's heads. At the head table, Chloe's face was ashen. She knew where this was going. She subtly tried to get Leo's attention, to get him to stop me, but he was frozen, staring at me with wide, uncomprehending eyes. "This silent partner," I continued, "funded everything, the rent, the car, the clothes. This partner even funded the very generous salary of a certain financial manager who was hired to oversee a legacy fund. A fund, I should add, that was established in the name of my late wife, Sarah." A collective gasp went through the room. I had their complete and undivided attention. I had just connected the dots for them. My grief, my money, and my brother's inexplicable wealth. I turned my gaze fully on Chloe, who looked like a porcelain doll that was about to crack. "And the name of this silent partner? The source of all this good fortune?" Well, it wasn't a person exactly. It was a private partnership. A very special, very secret private partnership formed between me and the bride, Chloe. The revelation landed like a physical blow. The silence in the room was shattered by a cacophony of shocked murmurs. I watched as Leo's face cycled through confusion, then disbelief, then dawning, horrified understanding. He turned to Chloe, his mouth agape. "What is he talking about?" he stammered, his voice a pathetic whisper. But Chloe couldn't answer. She was staring at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of terror and pure, unadulterated hatred. "You see," I said, holding up a hand to quell the rising chatter. "I was a grieving husband. I was overwhelmed. I hired Chloe, a seemingly competent professional, to manage my late wife's legacy fund. I also, foolishly, tasked her with managing my family's financial requests to shield myself from the constant pressure to bankroll my brother's life. I created a buffer. But what I actually created was an opportunity. I gestured to the large screen behind the stage, which until now had been displaying a romantic photo montage of the happy couple. With a discreet click of a remote in my hand, the montage vanished, replaced by a crystal-clear image of a bank statement. I gave Chloe access, and she and Leo saw a golden opportunity. Over the last 2 years, nearly $2 million have been systematically funneled from my wife's legacy fund into their lives. It was all meticulously documented as family loans, all approved by me in a state of grief-stricken distraction. They called it seed money, a startup investment. They called it support. I clicked the remote again. A flowchart appeared on the screen, with arrows showing money moving from the Sarah Jensen Legacy Fund to an account in Chloe's name, and then branching out to pay for Leo's rent, his car lease, his credit card bills, and a series of large cash transfers to his personal account. This wasn't support, I said, my voice ringing with cold fury. This was a meticulously planned heist, orchestrated by the bride and enjoyed by the groom. They weren't partners in business, they were partners in crime. The room was in an uproar. People were standing up, turning to stare at the head table. I saw Leo bury his face in his hands, his body shaking with sobs. Chloe was frozen, her face a mask of utter devastation. My parents looked like they had seen a ghost, their faces pale and slack with shock. They could no longer deny it. The proof was right there, 10 feet tall for everyone to see. I wasn't finished. I clicked the remote one last time. The screen now showed 2 images side by side. On the left was the original sketch of the engagement ring I had designed for Sarah, complete with my notes and her initials intertwined in the band. On the right was a high-resolution photograph of the ring on Chloe's finger, taken by the wedding photographer just hours earlier. The resemblance was undeniable, exact in every detail. And the symbol of their love, I said, my voice dripping with contempt, this beautiful ring. It's not just a classic design, as Chloe tried to tell me. It is the exact custom design I created for my late wife, a design Chloe stole from my personal files. She didn't just take our money, she took our memories. She took the most sacred symbol of my love for Sarah and put it on her own finger to celebrate a union funded by her theft. This final detail seemed to break the spell of shock and replace it with pure outrage. I heard someone in the crowd, a friend of my mother's, let out a horrified, "Oh my God." I looked at my parents. My mother was openly weeping, her face a crumpled mess of shame and disbelief. My father was staring at the screen, his face ashen, the smug pride completely erased, replaced by the sickening realization of his own foolishness. He had defended this. He had called me jealous. He had enabled this monstrous betrayal. And now, the truth was laid bare for his entire social circle to witness. The empire of lies they had helped to build around their golden child had crumbled to dust in the space of a 5-minute speech. The public humiliation was absolute, a consequence far more potent than any private confrontation could ever have been. I had not only exposed the crime, I had exposed the moral bankruptcy of the entire family system that allowed it to happen. I lowered the microphone. My part was done. I didn't need to say another word. The chaos in the room was my closing statement. Leo, completely broken, pushed his chair back violently and stumbled away from the table, blindly pushing through the stunned guests and out of the ballroom. Chloe didn't move. She just sat there, staring into the middle distance, as if the force of the public humiliation had turned her to stone. The wedding planner and her staff were rushing around, trying to restore some semblance of order, but it was impossible. The party was over. The fairy tale had ended, revealing the grim reality beneath. I stepped off the stage and walked toward the exit, my path clearing as people moved aside, their faces a mixture of pity, awe, and morbid curiosity. As I reached the door, my father intercepted me. His face was a wreck of conflicting emotions. "Alex, I didn't know," he stammered, his voice hoarse. "You tried to tell us." I looked at him, not with anger, not with triumph, but with a profound and weary emptiness. "Yes," I said quietly. I did. There was nothing else to say. I couldn't absolve him of his willful blindness. I couldn't undo the years of favoritism and denial that had led us to this catastrophic moment. I turned and walked out of the ballroom, leaving them all behind in the wreckage of the celebration. I didn't look back. Walking out into the cool night air felt like taking my first breath after nearly drowning. The weight that I had been carrying for years, the grief, the resentment, the burden of my family's expectations felt lighter. The vindication was not joyful. It was a hollow, aching relief. It was the grim satisfaction of a necessary amputation. I had cut the toxic parts of my life away, and while the wound was still fresh, I knew for the first time in a very long time that it would finally have a chance to heal. The aftermath was as messy and complete as one would expect. The wedding obviously was over. Most of the guests fled shortly after I left. The story of the toast became an instant legend in their social circles, a cautionary tale of greed and public implosion. The legal proceedings began the very next Monday. With the mountain of evidence Mr. Davies had compiled and the public nature of the confession, Chloe and Leo had no defense. My lawyers filed a comprehensive lawsuit for fraud, embezzlement, and breach of fiduciary duty. We placed liens on every asset they had, the apartment, the car, and every bank account we could find. They were in effect rendered penniless overnight. Chloe was fired from her position at the asset management firm she had worked for before I hired her privately. Her professional reputation was irrevocably destroyed. The State Bar also opened an investigation into the lawyer who had drafted the documents concerning my emotional incompetence, uncovering a pattern of unethical practices. Leo, stripped of his charm and his stolen wealth, had a complete breakdown. He was faced with the reality of his life for the first time, without the buffer of his parents' denial or my money, and he couldn't handle it. He disappeared for a while, staying on friends' couches until he inevitably wore out his welcome. The last I heard, he was living back at home with my parents, a 30-something man-child forced to confront the failure he had spent his entire life running from. My relationship with my parents was fractured, perhaps irreparably. They tried to apologize in their own clumsy way. There were tearful phone calls and long, rambling emails filled with regret and self-pity, but they still couldn't fully grasp the depth of their complicity. They still framed it as making a mistake and being fooled by that girl, unable to accept that the foundation for Chloe's betrayal was the one they had built over decades by coddling and enabling their favored son. I kept my distance, needing space to heal without their toxic influence. The legal battle ended not with a dramatic courtroom showdown, but with a quiet, comprehensive settlement. Faced with the overwhelming evidence and the threat of criminal charges for fraud, Chloe and Leo agreed to everything. They signed over every asset that had been purchased with my money. The loft was sold. The car was repossessed. They were forced to liquidate any and all investments. Chloe even had to sell the ring, Sarah's ring, with the proceeds being returned to the legacy fund. Mr. Davies' team meticulously clawed back nearly every dollar that had been stolen. It was a total and complete financial victory, but reclaiming the money was only part of the solution. The more important victory was reclaiming the narrative. I had taken back control of my life and my wife's legacy. The name Sarah Jensen Legacy Fund was retired, as it had been tainted by the affair. Instead, I used the recovered funds, along with a significant portion of my own, to establish the Sarah Jensen Foundation for Young Innovators. It was a charitable organization dedicated to providing scholarships and seed funding to bright, ambitious young women in STEM and finance women like her. It was a living, breathing tribute, a way to channel her spirit of innovation and brilliance into the world, to create a legacy of opportunity, not of greed. Pouring my energy into building the foundation became my therapy. It was a way to honor her memory that was active, positive, and forward-looking. It was a way to transform the ugliness of the betrayal into something beautiful and meaningful. I was no longer just the guardian of her memory, I was its active champion. Months turned into a year. The noise from the wedding fallout faded. I found a new rhythm to my life, one that was quieter and more intentional. The foundation thrived, and I took immense satisfaction in reading the applications, in seeing Sarah's spirit reflected in the dreams of a new generation. I sold the large, empty house that held so many ghosts and moved into a smaller place in the city, a space that was mine alone, filled with my own future, not the echoes of a stolen past. My contact with my family remained minimal. I learned that Leo was in therapy and working a menial job, the first real job he had ever held. I held out a sliver of hope that he might one day become a person of substance, but I knew it was not my responsibility to help him get there. His journey was his own. As for my parents, they were learning to live with the consequences of their choices, their social standing diminished, their family fractured. I felt a distant sadness for them, but not a sense of obligation. I had given them a chance to stand with me, and they had chosen to stand against me. The price of that choice was the distance I now kept. The anger that had fueled me for so long had finally dissipated, leaving behind not a void, but a sense of peace. I had faced the ultimate betrayal, and had not only survived, but had emerged stronger, more self-aware, and with a renewed sense of purpose. I had protected Sarah's legacy, not by hoarding it, but by transforming it into a force for good in the world. I had finally learned to separate her memory from my grief. Her memory was a source of light and inspiration. The grief was a scar that would always be a part of me, but it no longer defined me. It was a reminder of a great love and a great loss, but it was not the end of my story. So, why am I telling you all of this? I'm sharing this story not for sympathy or to relive the drama. I'm sharing it as a warning and as a message of hope. A warning that betrayal can come from the places you least expect it, from family, from those you trust implicitly. Willful blindness is not a defense, it's an invitation for disaster. Pay attention. Trust your instincts. Protect what is sacred to you, whether it's a financial legacy, a memory, or your own peace of mind. But more importantly, this is a message of hope. It's a story about the enduring power of standing up for yourself, for the truth, and for the memory of those you love. It's about the fact that even after the most profound loss and the most painful betrayal, it is possible to reclaim your life. It's possible to find justice, not just in a legal sense, but in a spiritual one. You can rewrite the ending of your story. The toast I gave at that wedding was the end of a chapter defined by grief and victimhood, and the beginning of a new one defined by strength and purpose. I took their most public celebration and turned it into a public accounting. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it because the truth, no matter how ugly, is always more powerful than the most beautiful lie. I honored my wife not by hiding from the world in my grief, but by fighting for her, for us, for the legacy of a love that was too brilliant to be extinguished by greed and deceit. And in the end, that is a victory that no one can ever take away from me. If you are facing a betrayal, if you feel lost in the fog of injustice, know that you have the power to find your own way out. It will be hard. It will be painful. But the fight for your own truth is the most worthwhile battle you will ever wage.